Spring starts. I'm not sorry. Spring training is over. Spring training is over, and regular season starts tomorrow for the Brewers in New York. So, as I've done the past couple seasons, decided to be a great idea to get you on and talk some Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah, excited for it to start. It's every winter. It feels like we have to wait forever and ever for baseball to come back, but here we are, 2025. Let's do this.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess we'll get this out of the way first, as it's going to be a very different start to the Brewer baseball season, as for the first time and pretty much since the Brewers' existence, we don't have Bob Uecker on the radio call, and don't want this to turn into a show where we're bawling our eyes out. But Bob Uecker unfortunately passed away in January of this year, just short of his 91st birthday, and. I guess what are your thoughts broadcasting wise for the Brewers coming into the season, and just some general, Bob Uecker thoughts?
Oh, I mean, every year but one, Bob Uecker has been there for the Brewers franchise, and now this is the second time ever that that he's not going to be there. It's going to be hard for young Brewers fans, old Brewers fans, people like me who I consider someone in the middle. I thought Jeff Levering and the crew did a great job kind of capturing the moments in the first spring training radio broadcast without Uecker, and that was a tough one to listen to. But the first regular season game, I know there's going to be tributes. There's going to be they've got merchandise that's going to go to that they're selling that's going to go to causes that the Uecker family supported. The radio broadcast itself, I'm sure they will touch on it again. It's going to be an emotional day for Brewers fans, and just having an entire season without Ueck, like that's how I grew to love Brewers baseball, was listening to Uecker as a kid at night in the summers. After it was supposed to be bedtime, I'm turning on the radio down in my bedroom and listen to the end of that Brewers game, and like that's what I knew growing up, and that's the same for so many Brewers fans, and not just Brewers fans. Like, he was beloved by fans and players and everyone who ever met him. It's going to be hard, but luckily for us, like, we have some of the best dang broadcasters around, both on radio and TV for the Brewers, with Levering and Grindle and Marr on the radio broadcast. Like, if it could be turned over to anyone, it's that crew, and I know they will do Uecker justice this year, but it's going to be hard.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be hard, and we're kind of gonna get hit three times with the emotions and the remembering. Mm-hmm. The spring training that you mentioned, the first radio broadcast for spring training, the regular season opener tomorrow, and then the home opener coming up on Monday. So we kind of going to get hit three times with the remembrance of it. But before we go any further, any favorite Uecker stories? I know he told 8 million of them out in the air, and how many of them were true, only he knows. But any favorite Uecker story?
Oh gosh, I guess I loved how he was able to, not one story in particular, but just how he was able to like seamlessly flip back and forth between, talking about the game, talking stories, doing promos, and, anytime he could spin something into, there's a hotline drive to right field, and what else is hot is using her sausages on the grill, and enjoy that with a nice cold Miller Lite. And just like, he was so good at what he did, and anytime he would pull those out, I would giggle a little bit, because I'd like, only Uecker could do that the way that he does it.
Yeah, I'm sure Usinger just loved some of the commercials that he did with them on the live reads, I should say, because some of them are just epic radio there. But before we move further, if you just want to, I guess, introduce yourself and where you contribute. I know it's at the bottom of the screen here as well. Just let people know where they can find your work and all the awesome stuff that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. These days I am writing for the website justbaseball.com. They write about the entire league, and so that's actually what I do as well, kind of an MLB writer in general, as opposed to just Brewers. Of course, Brewers are still my favorite team, so that's who I'm going to root for, but get to put out kind of some product about a little bit of everything. And then to the side, still doing the Cold Brew podcast with Dave Gasper. We were the editors over at Reviewing the Brew. He now works at Athlon Sports, and I'm at Just Baseball, but we still have the podcast. So that's kind of where we get to talk about the Brewers as well.
And I enjoy the podcast, and I look forward to reading your work at the site you're contributing now that you just talked about. Talking Sports with Evan can be found here live on X every either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, depending on just a lot of things that go into that. Facebook and YouTube, Talking Sports with Evan, Evan Wood Sports on X. And the podcast will be available Spotify and Apple pretty much first thing tomorrow morning. I start my workday at 8. By 7:30, it should be live, and you should be able to access it and give a listen to it if you'd rather not, I guess. Look at my face for about half hour to 40 minutes. You can just listen to the audio instead. But appreciate everybody listening, everybody watching, everyone that's going to listen and watch as well. And last season, the Brewers surprised a lot of people. You had Craig Counsell leave. You had a lot of question marks. A very young team. Jackson Churio, 20-year-old, making it to the big leagues. There was always the Yelich health issues, which ended up him missing the second half of the year with back surgery. And it was just a lot of question marks. And the Brewers end up winning the division again, winning 90-plus games, and unfortunately fell in the wild card round. And this year, Brewers kind of similar, other than we know Pat Murphy's a very good manager. We have Yelich's health that's a concern. We have pitching rotation, depth concerns because of injuries, and young guys needing to take that next step. And I guess just big picture overall, when you look at last year's team compared to this year's team, how do they compare with one another to you?
For sure. I think you look at, if you want to break it down by, the three different parts, the offense, the starting and pitching, and the bullpen. The offense, your big loss, obviously, is Willy Adames. And the questions there, how do you replace that run production? I know Adames, since the Brewers acquired him and he had that, that big year in 22, you saw some of his kind of like batting average and on base percentage and some of those numbers dip, but he was still a run producer. He was still hitting home runs. He was still knocking runs in. And so that's the big question is where do you replace that? Because the Brewers didn't necessarily bring in someone or have an obvious candidate to just be, this is our new Willy Adames. So a lot of the rest of the offense looks the same in terms of the names. And I think the answer to how do you replace Willy Adames is amongst all of those. Jackson Churio, fantastic last year, but it took him a couple months to get there. He has a full, Jackson Churio-esque season, and you replace some of that production. Christian Yelich ends up missing, about half the season due to that back injury. He's had that surgery. Hopefully it's corrected. You get a full season out of him. Do you replace another chunk of that? Garrett Mitchell, does he stay on the field the entire year and take a step forward? What are you going to get from, Vinny Capra and Oliver Dunn and whatever kind of the plan is over there to take over third base by committee? It's like by look, a lot of it's the same, but without one big guy. And so there's your question is how do they replace it? If they do, by kind of the sum of the parts, the Brewers were I think they were number 6 in offense last year, if I remember correctly. The offense should be very strong again. Starting pitching wise, eventually you'll have Brandon Woodruff. That's one of the big names, but you see a lot of the same guys from how the season ended. Tobias Myers coming back, Aaron Savali coming back. Freddie Peralta obviously is going to start out as your ace. You did have some of the guys like DL Hall, Aaron Ashby, and whatnot potentially pegged for that 5th spot. Now some injuries have happened, and you're going to really dig into your depth. But the Brewers kind of always just make it work with starting pitching, and I have faith, even though it's going to be tested early, that they'll be able to do it again. And the bullpen is just going to be a beast once again. I know you lose a big name in Devin Williams, but if there is any bullpen in the league that could withstand the loss of a player like Devin Williams outside of maybe the Guardians, who have just an epic bullpen, it's going to be a team like the Brewers, who just constantly churn out relievers. And outside of Devin, they have most of the same guys, a Jared Koenig, a Brian Hudson, a Trevor McGill, an Abner Uribe back from injury. They have most of those high-profile guys back, Payamp, Spagaro, et cetera, et cetera. So that bullpen should once again be feared. So that's kind of what you're looking at. The biggest question mark is on offense and whether or not they're able to replace the production from Adonis.
And the other thing too, you mentioned the name of Devin Williams, but they didn't have Devin Williams for pretty much the entire first half of the season, and the bullpen was fine before he was there, and it got even better when he was there. Yeah. But I guess start off now with Woody, Brandon Woodruff. He has an injury and a surgery that there's really nobody you can look at and get an idea of what he's going to be, because there's really no case studies of recovery process to the procedure and the surgery that he had.
Mm-hmm.
If he comes back to form or close to form, the Brewers, they're going to be a case study on this injury and procedure moving forward. What are your thoughts on Woody? And I know he looked good in his one Cactus League appearance, looked okay to good in his single A appearance. What do you think what are the expectations for Woody? Is it going to be pre-injury form, or maybe tap the brakes a little bit?
I'm like personally trying to stay cautiously optimistic, but I'm also preparing myself for the fact that like Brandon Woodruff could come out and, throw to a 4.5 ERA or a 5 ERA, or something like that, where, that, like you said, like it's a unique injury. It's not one that players successfully come back from all the time. It's also just not one that happens all the time. You have to take Woodruff's age into consideration a little bit. He is over 30. But at the very least, the Brewers have been approaching this. The Brewers and Brandon Woodruff have been approaching this in as good a way as possible. They've been very, very careful about it, making sure Woodruff stays on a certain regimen. They have not pushed him, even with all these injuries to the starting lineup. They understand that Brandon Woodruff's case is his own case, and he needs to be treated the same way they planned on this entire time. That's not only good for the Brewers, because it means they have the best chance of getting the best Brandon Woodruff possible, but it's also important for Woodruff himself. Again, he's on, he's crested that 30-year-old mark, and he wants to keep extending his career. So he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that career lasts as long as possible. And that includes approaching the recovery from this injury in the right way. So there's just a lot of unknowns, again, with his age, with the type of injury, with the fact that, he's not quite back to like full rehab starts or anything like that yet. We'll get a better idea maybe once that happens. But I think Brewers fans just should be prepared for the fact that like there could truly be like any outcome with Woodruff. And if it doesn't end up looking super great, that's okay. He came back from a horrible injury, and there's plenty of players who come back from tough injuries and need an entire season of actually playing to get themselves right. That could be the case with Woodruff. But if anyone is going to like get past this, it's a bulldog like Woodruff. I could absolutely see a guy like him coming back and looking as close to his old self as possible.
When do you think we see him? Because he started the year on the injured list. When do you think we see him? Is it going to be end of April? Is it going to be Memorial Day? Is it going to be somewhere in between, or later than that? When do you think we're likely going to see him?
I think around Memorial Day makes the most sense with all the like roster stuff that's having to be done. Brandon Woodruff on a 60-day IL would mean that he wouldn't even be eligible to come back until then. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts here at the very beginning because there are players who need to be added to the roster just, to kick off the regular season. We know from watching recent seasons that plenty of changes happen just in those first 2 months of the year. You'll have guys who get DFA'd. You'll have guys who perform well and need to be added, guys who get hurt, and kind of all kinds of things. So you're going to need some flexibility on the roster based off of moves that end up happening early. And so I think that's most likely, and kind of based on how things looked, the fact that he was able to get on the mound that last weekend of spring training games, or second to last, I can't remember. He was able to pitch that inning in an actual spring training game. That is a great sign. He's still got a ways to go, but the fact that he did that in an actual live game means that he's not horribly far off. It's not. I couldn't really see him doing that and then them saying, well, he's not going to be back till July. So I think that Memorial Day mark or so is actually a pretty good target for Woodruff.
You talked about moves they're going to have to make to put guys on the roster. One of the moves eventually, and they just got to work on getting him stretched out, is former Brewer nemesis Jose Quintana. I know that he signed late, didn't go through full spring training, got to get him stretched out. When do you think we see Quintana for the first time this season? And what do you expect from Quintana?
Yeah, I think I'd say give him a couple weeks, maybe, hopefully at the most. So like maybe a mid-April type thing with him. They might have to make it work for just a little bit. It might not even be that long. I'd say that's probably the most. And once he does end up starting, the Brewers probably aren't going to want to work him in until he's able to go at least 5. 5 innings might be the most he goes that first start. But considering the fact, and we're probably going to get to this, the fact that they really only have 3 true starters right now, and they're going to be kind of potentially using, some younger guys who might not be ready to go long outings. They might have some bullpen games they have to throw in there. Like the bullpen's going to get tested early. So they're going to want, when Quintana does end up coming into the rotation, they're going to want him to eat some innings. So that'd be my expectations, that when he is able to throw, that he's going at least 5. But I'd say up to 2 weeks, hopefully less than that.
What are your expectations for him overall this season? I know he's an older pitcher. I think he was 3.75 ERA last year. I know that's not the end all be all stat for pitchers, but I think that'd be a good number 3, number 4 type starter role. What do you expect from him this season?
He's late 30s for a pitcher, and it's honestly impressive what he was able to do last year with the Mets. But he's been a little up and down kind of in some previous seasons. So like, I'd be happy if he put up numbers like honestly close to what Colin Ray put up. Like if he had an ERA in the low 4s, I'd be okay with that for Quintana, to be honest. That's really what you're kind of replacing with him anyway. And so we'll see. You also had obviously Cortez, who almost was technically the replacement for Ray, but you would think that with Cortez's background that he would perform better than that. So if you can get like that sort of production, which obviously has worked just fine for the Brewers the last 2 seasons, out of Quintana, I would feel comfortable with that. If he's able to pitch in the high 3s for an ERA once again, what an amazing steal for the Brewers, and what a great pickup towards the end of the spring.
You mentioned they have 3 starting pitchers right now. You talked a little bit about how they're going to kind of fill that. You also have Elvin Rodriguez, who could start, Tyler Alexander, who could start. Is it, as you mentioned, bullpen by committee? So we're going to see Jared Koenig and him get some spot starts here and there, where he goes an inning and then they move on to the next guy.
Yeah, I think so. The Brewers announced earlier today that Chad Patrick, who was the AAA pitcher of the year for them in Nashville last year, did make the opening day roster. And so I think he will end up starting one of those games. And then I think kind of 2 of the guys that you mentioned will end up probably combining to some sort of bullpen game where maybe each one pitches 2 or 3 innings or more if they end up, happen to be doing particularly well. And that is Tyler Alexander and Elvin Rodriguez. Pat Murphy had a lot of really good things to say about Elvin. He seems to really like him as a pitcher. He had done really well in a stint overseas in Japan, but really more primarily as a reliever. But he does have starting experience. So Murph just seems to really like him. And so I feel like he'll get a chance to get into some of those innings during that 5th game where they have to kind of figure things out. But Tyler Alexander, that's also why he was brought in. He can relieve, whether in long relief or short relief. Like he's going to be kind of another do-it-all for the Brewers this year. And so some combination of those two, Jared Koenig being an opener, could 100% see that as well. Although with the fact that it sounds like the Brewers are going to keep Abner Uribe on the roster to start the year, which means he has to sit out that 4-game suspension right away, it'd be a little tougher to take Koenig out of the back end of the bullpen when you're already short an arm down there. And we know he can do extremely well in those roles as well. So I would see it falling more on those other couple guys, but your guess is as good as anyone's, as to how that'll actually shake out once it comes to it.
Last year in spring training, Murphy talked about Bryce Terang and making a Planton leap. And his offense it cooled off towards the end of the year, but obviously platinum glove, Quantum leap, that's what I meant. Platinum glove, gold glove. Obviously defensively, he was the best defensive second baseman, and he did provide some good quality at bats at the top of the order, 50 steals. I think he only got caught maybe 5 times, if my memory serves me correct. I don't have the stat right in front of me. Who is a player this year that you feel takes that Quantum leap? Is it Sal Frelick who put on 15, 20 pounds of muscle? Is it Garrett Mitchell and he's finally healthy? Is it a Oliver Dunn? Who do you think is the guy that takes that huge step out of the young guys?
I think
Jackson Churio.
Mitchell. Yeah, right. Man, if a quantum leap is what Jackson Churio gets, good Lord, he'll win the MVP. But I think Garrett Mitchell actually is a really good candidate for that. When he's been healthy, he's generally put up good numbers for the Brewers. OPS plus is above 100, which is league average. Racking up steals, getting on base, beating out grounders for infield hits, and cranking some home runs. He's a guy who, when he was drafted, had the potential to be a 5-tool player if he could just tap into the in-game power. Whether he can do that on a consistent basis is still kind of a question, but he doesn't necessarily need to be like a 25, 30 home run guy to be what the Brewers need him to be. If he can be constantly getting on base, playing elite defense like he can, stealing bases, taking extra bases, that's what would help the Brewers so much. And he absolutely has the talent to do that. I feel like this is the year that he can finally show that he's healthy and take that exact leap. He has all the talent in the world to be able to do so.
He just has to stop having some of these bad luck injuries. He got hit on the finger last year and he missed some time. And then the year before that, I think the first game or 2 of the year, he had the shoulder injury. And
diving into third base. Yep.
Just if he could stay healthy. And again, Matt Carroll joining me, talking Milwaukee Brewers baseball. Rhys Hoskins signed the 2-year contract. They exercised the option. He's back. A lot of power last year, but numbers-wise, consistency could have been better. A full season removed from ACL reconstruction. What are your thoughts on Hoskins? He had a huge spring, I will say.
Well, looked fantastic this spring. Hitting bombs, getting on base. We saw his numbers before the ACL surgery when he was with Philly, and that was why Brewers fans were so excited to be able to manage to get him in on a relatively team-friendly deal. He exercises a relatively expensive contract option because that year here didn't quite go the way he planned and didn't, rebuild his value for a free agency attempt. And so, he's going to try at it again. And I think, that's one of the things with ACL injuries in recent years have become, kind of less of a big deal as they used to be in the past, when a player, whether in, baseball, football, or anything like that, would tear an ACL 20 years ago, it'd be devastating. Their career might be over. And if it wasn't, it'd be forever till they got back. Now you can recover from an ACL in less than a year in a lot of cases and look pretty dang good. But that doesn't mean it can't still be a devastating injury. And so I think a lot of people maybe not necessarily forgot, but, didn't cut him as much slack as maybe he deserved from the fact that he was coming off of an ACL injury. Like, there are still players that take a while to feel right after something like that happens. And I just find it hard to believe, knowing his history and his numbers prior to that injury, that it didn't have at least somewhat of an effect on him. Look at Christian Yelich, who broke his kneecap and then, was back for the next season, but just didn't look right for years. Like, seemingly minor injuries to us can be, like, mentally bad for the players. And so I feel like being a full year now past that again is going to be even better for Hoskins. And I think we get a big year out of him.
And he also is going to have he also had an actual typical off season and not rehabbing.
Mm-hmm.
And before I jump into your thoughts on how the season's going to go, Yelich talked about the back, had the surgery. Apparently, it was similar surgery to what Brooke Lopez had, and we've seen how Lopez has come back from his surgery. I know different sport, but the back has basically been a problem since the knee injury. You talked about the shattered kneecap. The back's been a problem pretty much since then. Can we, I guess, is it just hope that the problem's solved, or is there always still that, can the back hold up for a good stretch of games?
Yeah, I mean, I think until we see him go, weeks on end without mention of the back, there's going to be that wonder. Like, he got the surgery and that's great. I sure hope that kind of nipped it in the bud for good. But I'm even for the everyday man, like, back injuries can just nag and nag and nag and be, debilitating, let alone for a professional athlete. So I think there's probably a good chance the Brewers try and manage it a little bit to start the year, just to be absolutely careful. But yeah, I mean, until we get into like June and Christian Yelich is saying, yep, haven't felt anything with the back, it's been totally fine, I think maybe then I'll stop worrying in the back of my mind. But it's going to be there for a while until he says otherwise. So hopefully it's gone. Hopefully it's behind him, because, man, if Christian Yelich is fully healthy, again, like that is going to go a long way towards what the Brewers do this year.
Is he likely, I'm not going to say he's a full-time DH, but is he going to get a lot of his playing time at DH this year?
If they can convince him to, I sure hope so. I know he likes playing the field, and I know he actually had kind of improved a little bit again in left field after some of his defensive numbers had started falling down. But you just, it'll preserve you if you just stick it out at DH more often. It'll just be better for your body. And B, the Brewers have so many talented defensive outfielders. Sal Frelick, Garrett Mitchell, Jackson Churio, Blake Perkins when he comes back, like all fantastic defensive outfielders. Your outfield's just going to be better with those guys out there versus Yelich, who is no slouch. I get it. But like all the more reason for him to hopefully trend towards DH more.
Moving to in season, the NL Central. Brewers have pretty much controlled the NL Central for a number of years now. The Pirates are the Pirates. Good young starting pitchers, but a lot of question marks there. Cardinals might have some improvement. The Reds hired Terry Francona, made some roster changes. Gavin Lux, for example, and the Cubs made a couple of decent moves. Brewers, some moves around the margins, I think, is probably best to say. What do you think their chances are in the NL Central this year?
I mean, I think the Brewers have as good a chance as any to repeat again as NL Central champs. I think it's going to be real tough to fend off the Cubs. We did our predictions on Cold Brew podcast this week, and I predicted the Brewers to win the division, but with only 89 games and not finishing more than a game or two ahead of the Cubs. I think it's going to look a lot like that 2018 season where it comes down to those two really battling for it in the end. I think the Cubs addressed a lot of things, but still have some question marks, particularly in the pitching staff. I think the Reds are going to get a lot closer to making a run for the division this year, so long as their young talent doesn't get hurt, kind of like they did last year. But I still think there may be one more year away from it truly blossoming for them. I think the Cardinals, in the same sense, they'll look better probably than last year. But because they have some young guys who really started to impress towards the end of the year. But again, pitching concerns, and they also got rid of some guys from the pitching staff. And then the Pirates, at least they have Paul Skeens. I'll give them that. They'll be fun to watch when Skeens is pitching, but outside of that, I don't know how they're going to score any runs.
Last year, Brewers fall in the wild card round to the Mets. 2 years ago, fall in the wild card round to the Diamondbacks. I don't have to go back any further than that. Is this the year they take that next step and win the wild card round and move on to divisional round? Or is that kind of the ceiling for the Brewers until we, I guess, see everybody coming back healthy?
It's crazy because you look back to last year, the Brewers absolutely had a team that could have gone far in the playoffs, and it came down to one Devin Williams pitch, essentially. It set up exactly how the Brewers wanted it to be set up, and Pete Alonso just had a better at bat. That's just how it was. So this year, the Brewers, if health works out in their favor on offense and they're able to kind of replace by the sum of their parts the production of Willy Adames, absolutely they will have the ability to be able to go deep depending on what the starting pitching health situation looks like come the end of the year. Maybe things shake out that the Brewers end up making a move at the deadline for some starting pitching, kind of like they did last year, and that's how they approach the final part of the season. I don't know, but I feel like it's really going to be dependent on that. If they continue to have to scrape for starting pitching depth, it'll be hard enough just to get to the playoffs, let alone to make a deep run. But they need a strong top of that rotation, 1, 2, and 3, to be able to hope for a long playoff run. And let's say Freddie's pitching like Freddie can pitch at his best. Nestor Cortez looks like he's looked, and Woodruff does come back and look like most of his old self. Well, there you go. That's what you need for the top of the rotation. 100% Brewers can make a playoff run and finally hit a second round for the first time since 2018.
And the last thing I want to ask you before I let you go, had a couple pitchers pitching. We've seen their names recently: Jacob Mizorowski, Craig. Is it Yoho?
Mm-hmm.
Yoho, I think I've seen enough from him to say he's definitely going to make a big impact with the team this year.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob Mizorowski. How much is his control, is his command something that can be fixed? Or do we just have to accept the fact that he's got nasty stuff, but he's also going to take a lot of pitches to get people out?
I think ultimately that is going to be who he is. And I think ultimately that's what ends up with him in the bullpen. Because you can survive with a little bit of control issues as long as your stuff is nasty enough and you're pitching in shorter stints. They've reined some of it in over the last, few years of him being in the system, but just with how hard he throws and the types of pitches he throws and everything like that, I find it hard to believe that all of a sudden out of nowhere, he's going to be this pitcher with even, above average control, let alone average control. So I think for the most part, maybe they'll be able to get it a little bit better. But even that, I don't know if that plays as a starter. And that's fine. With the type of stuff that he has, he can be one of the scariest relievers in the entire league if they finally just get to the point where, that's what they decide to do with him. That's what happened with Josh Hader. He was a starter basically his entire minor league career. And then the second he got to the big leagues, he was turned into a reliever, and look what happens. One of the most fearsome arms in the entire league. Like it could be fine.
And how long before do you think we see Craig Yoho on the big league roster? Are we going to have to wait a little while to maybe close to the All-Star break, or is he going to get caught up probably pretty quickly?
I think Yoho's too good to be called up after the All-Star break. I think he ends up before, might not be until May or June, because the Brewers want to work through what they currently have on the roster and see who is and isn't going to cut it. But, I mean, we saw Yoho fly up the system last year. He was disgusting in spring training. This year, pitching against, even a little bit better competition than he pitched against in the minors last year. He's ready, and he can be one of the most brutal arms in the Brewers bullpen. 100% think before the All-Star break.
You mentioned 89 wins. Who's your Brewer MVP? Who's your Brewer Cy Young? And who's going to be their newcomer of the year?
Ooh. We'll go Jackson Chourio for MVP. Even if Yelich comes back and looks like, something close to prime Yelich, not prime Yelich, but like what we know current max potential.
We saw first, I guess.
Yeah. I still think Chourio is just too darn good. He's looked that darn good in the spring. He's there. He's here. He's going to be the MVP for the Brewers this year. 100%. For Cy Young, it's a good question. I'm gonna throw out Nestor Cortez. I actually think he steps up and is the most consistent starter for the Brewers this year. And if you're talking Cy Young, you're usually talking a starter. I think Freddie is obviously great. Love myself some Freddie, but we know he kind of can have, even his good years can have some ups and downs. And Woodruff is still an unknown. Cortez just gets it done every year. Even last year in a struggle year, his numbers were good. And so I'm going to throw him out there as a Cy Young. And as for newcomer of the year, I'm going to go with Yoho. I think he comes up and kills it once he's here and never sees the minors again.
Agree with you on Yoho. So one of my colleagues at one of my part-time jobs, not one of my part-time jobs. How many jobs do I have? But anyway, he asked the same question for his first episode of Brewers Warm-Up tomorrow. And I said Freddie Peralta. I just, for some reason, feel this is going to be the year that we see the Freddie that we've been hoping to see since he made his big league debut on, was it Mother's Day?
Yes.
Consistency's been his biggest problem. And he struggles sometimes to get outs, especially in that fourth, fifth inning where his pitch counts tend to climb. But for some reason, I think this is the year something just clicks with him. Maybe it's just wishful thinking. MVP, I think if we get a full healthy season of him, I think Garrett Mitchell.
Okay. Nice.
Definitely there. But I think Garrett Mitchell, with what he can do in the field, plus with his bat and on the base paths, that's who I'm leaning towards right now, but that's going to be a big if we get a full season healthy for them.
Yeah, 100%. Again, like there's a reason that I picked him as a guy just that I absolutely love is because he has true 5-tool potential. Like he can be that guy. He could be Brewers MVP level, 100%. So, and if he is, that's watch out for the Brewers offense. Absolutely.
And if he can't stay healthy, I do not take blame at all for jinxing him that proclamation. But appreciate you jumping on. Love to get you back on maybe right around Memorial Day just to give a recap of what we think of the Brewers thus far, and then get you on after that too, and just kind of, hey, where are the Brewers at right now? I always appreciate talking Brewers with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to hop on and anytime.
yeah, one last let people know where they find your stuff. One last pitch for there, and then have you go about your day.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, writing over at Just Baseball, a lot of great stuff over there. If you're fans of any team, if you're fans of betting, there's plenty of good content to kind of go through. And then for podcasting, it's Dave and I on the Cold Brew podcast. Episodes of that come out on Tuesday mornings.
Well, again, appreciate you coming on. Look forward to listening to your Cold Brew podcast, and I'll definitely be checking out you said Just Baseball?
JustBaseball.com. You got it.
Be checking that out. And then on X, if people want to find you there, is at MKEMax3. So follow on there for any of your brewer questions or content that you're looking for. I definitely encourage that. So, again, thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate it, and be talking to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you then.
Yep. Was Matt Carroll, who he just talked about how to find his work, how to find, like I said, how to find his work and whatnot. And big thank you to him for coming on, talking sports with Evan. Appreciate you, those watching live, those going to be watching later on, whatever. Appreciate it. Now, normally when I have a guest on, I'm done after my guest. Boom, we're done. And I, kind of shoot the breeze a little bit with my guest. But some breaking news yesterday, and again, today, Wednesday, March 26th. Some breaking news yesterday hit the wires about right around this time yesterday, right about 24 hours ago. Dame Lillard out indefinitely with a blood clot in his calf. A lot of people questioning, is he done for the year? Is he going to be back? A lot of those questions coming around. And for those new to the show, or those that may have forgotten, I have some insight to what it's going to look like for Dame moving forward. Back in November of 2022, I checked myself, drove myself to the ER after work one day because something just wasn't feeling right. I thank this Apple Watch on my wrist to this day for basically saving my life, because based off that and looking at my heart rate, looking at my blood oxygen level, made me realize that something wasn't right. And I've been kind of feeling icky and probably for several weeks prior to that, easily winded, more quicker than usual. And I'm a big guy, so my cardio is not the best. So I just didn't think much of it. Maybe it's a respiratory thing going on, because, hey, November, lots of crud out there. But I, excuse me, went to the hospital, got checked out, and got a chest x-ray, got a CAT scan on my chest. Turned out I had a saddle pulmonary embolism. And pulmonary embolism is a fancy term for blood clot in your lung. Saddle pulmonary embolism means that both sides of the pulmonary artery is basically blocked, and it was so bad that it was starting to put strain on my heart. So if I don't go to the doctor when I did, there would not be any Talking Sports with Evan. I wouldn't be around if I didn't go to the doctor when I did. I probably didn't have much time left. And I know pulmonary embolism, blood clot in the calf, there's differences to it. But I also had a friend of mine who had a clot issue in his calf too, or calf ankle area, where he had foot surgery, and it kind of feeds together a little bit too. So I had a procedure done where they went in right about here, with catheters and whatnot. Went in here through the into the lung, broke up the clot. I was on a heparin drip pretty much as soon as they discovered it was a clot, and now I continue to take blood thinners. I've taken blood thinners basically since November of 2022. I feel I have a good understanding of dealing with blood clots. I don't know where mine came from, but if Dame's wasn't caught when it was, there was the possibility it would break off and find its way into the lung or into the brain. Thankfully, that didn't happen, because recovery from a pulmonary embolism, survival rate isn't great. And then when you hear the term blood clot, and especially a pulmonary embolism, that's shocking. Like, that's like a ton of bricks falling on you. That's what that feels like. But for Damian Lillard, it's in the calf. But we're not going to see Damian Lillard the rest of the season. We're just not. We're 11 games left before the playoffs. The only possibility for Damian Lillard to come back and play, in my opinion, and I know I'm not his doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not his doctor. I don't see what his scans look like. I don't see what his things, what his clot looks like and whatnot. But typically, the typical treatment, and I had the procedure done too, just because it was in the lungs. They had to clear that out. Typically, you're on blood thinners for the next 3 months or longer. 3 to 6 months is typically the time frame where you're going to be taking blood thinners to basically work on dissolving the clot. And the thing is, he's going to have to be very cautious with physical activity while that clot is being dissolved. Because again, the last thing you want is you don't want that clot to break off or a piece of it to break off and travel your bloodstream into your lung, into your brain. So you're looking at 90 days of taking a blood thinner. And then you're looking at once you get the all clear, working on getting that cardio up, getting your legs back, getting your energy back up, and being able to play a NBA basketball game. Even if the Bucks make the NBA Finals, it is extremely unlikely that he would be ready to play. It's very unlikely. And like I said, I feel I have a pretty good insight to dealing with blood clots as I've dealt with them myself. And when we talk about where did it come from? How did he get this? I hear people talking about the jabs. The thing with blood clots, there are numerous reasons people can get blood clots. Did he have any injuries? He's had dealing with calf issues. He's been dealing with a calf strain prior to the clot. There's a good chance that's where the clot came from. The injury issue is what caused the clot. Very good possibility. Surgeries. If you had a surgery, because you're likely not going to be as mobile, you're not going to be moving around, you're going to be very sedentary after the surgery, you're more susceptible to clots. So my mom had hip surgery. They put her on Eliquis for 90 days to make sure she didn't have any blood clotting issues. Thankfully, she didn't. I think it was 90 days. Anyway, I would have to check with her. If you've had any, if you've traveled a lot, fly a lot, things like that, you're more susceptible to them. And guess what? The NBA players are flying all over the country many days a week to play basketball. So I don't know how much they move around in the team planes when the plane takes off. When you're going from Milwaukee to California to Denver to Dallas, back to Milwaukee, down to Miami to Boston, when you're doing all that flying around, my guess is they're not moving around the plane very often. They're not getting up to walk. They're not getting up to move. So you have a calf injury on top of, and this is pure speculation on my part. I'm not a doctor. Don't play one on TV. Did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But the combination of flying all over the place with a calf injury, very likelihood that is what caused the injury. And when you look at Victor Wembanyama, they were just playing in France, flew back to the U.S., international travel. You're more susceptible. So you got the international travel that could have developed a clot too. Clots aren't something to play around with. And you can't point fingers at the medical staff. I saw that on X today. What is wrong with the medical staff? And now we got people getting blood clots. No, it doesn't work that way. Like I said, I still don't know where mine came from. I had none of the symptoms in my calves, in my feet, in my ankles that would give you a thought that you have deep vein thrombosis or a clot. There is no indication at all that I had any of those problems. And all of a sudden, I have a pulmonary embolism, and I'm lucky to be alive. So, unfortunately, the Bucks aren't going to have Dame for the rest of the year. And it's very sad that 2 years in a row now, we have yet to see Damian Lillard and Giannis on the floor together in a playoff series. That is very sad to see. And I hope my time frame, my timeline with Dame is wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he's able to play again this year. We're able to see Giannis and Dame on the floor together this season again. I hope we're able to see that. But if I was a betting man, I'm going to Vegas, I'm going to Pato, I'm going to Oneida, and I'm putting my money on that we don't see him again this year. So that's what I'm going to leave it at. And I'm not trying to be a Mr. Know-It-All. I'm not trying to say I know everything, and I could be completely wrong. And I hope I am. But we're not seeing Dame anymore this season. So congratulations to the Wisconsin women's hockey team on winning the national championship this year. Mark Johnson winning his 8th as the head coach. And just goes to show you just how great of a program the Badger women's hockey team are. The girls are great players. And it just shows you how great they are that Mark Johnson, before a penalty shot, just says, hey, who wants it? He's not saying you're doing it or you're doing it. It's like, who wants it? And that just shows you how much trust he has in his team to let them decide the penalty shot that way. And tip your hats to them. Probably one of the better championship teams we've ever seen in college sports, let alone sports in general. But 38 wins, I want to say, on the year. Most ever in women's hockey history, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I thought that's a stat that I saw. But with that said, thank you for watching. Thank you to Matt Carroll for coming on the show, talking Milwaukee Brewers. And I will be back with you next week, talking NFL Draft for NFL Draft Talk, exclusively on YouTube, Talking Sports with Evan. And then for my live show here on X at Evan with Sports. And on Facebook and YouTube, Talking Sports with Evan. And the podcast of this show will be up tomorrow morning between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. I'm Evan with Allison. This has been Talking Sports with Evan. Enjoy the rest of your evening and enjoy the rest of your week.